Good evening and welcome to Northeast Truth Radio, hosted by tnsradio.com. This is Mike Cooper. Check us out online at northeasttruth.com. Our next meeting is in Newcastle on the third Sunday of the month from 2 p.m. upstairs at the Bridge Hotel next to Castle Quay, which will be the 15th of August. This week's show is quite a different type of format to usual, which is to match our guest. Yesterday I spoke to our guest for over 4 hours on a range of subjects, and this show is a product of most of that. It's mostly in the format of a conversation between ourselves and partially an interview format. We may delve backwards and forwards in and out of subjects, but that's life, folks. I hope you enjoy it. Karen Sawyer is a writer, artist, musician, and very much a free spirit and free thinker. Her first book, entitled Soul Companions, Conversations with Contemporary Wisdom Keepers, a collection of encounters with spirit. This book is said to be an amazing and enlightening anthology of profound experiences shared between some of the world's most revered wisdom keepers and their spirit guides. Inspiring and empowering, it lights a path for all of us to follow. Her second book, in a similar format, is called The Dangerous Man, Conversations with Free Thinkers and Truth Seekers, a collection of alternative research. This involved interviews with 33 of the most brilliant and controversial minds of our time, including Michael Tsarian, Ralph Ellis, David Icke, Michael Cremo, Mary Croft, Winston Shrout, Robert Menard, John Harris, and a whole lot more. That book inspired Karen to create the Alternative Research Community Convention, known as the ARC Convention. The first event took place in Bath on the weekend of the 20th of February, and you can see some of that on YouTube. It featured Michael Tsarian as guest of honour. The second event will be held at the same place on August the 28th and 29th, later on this month. Check arcconvention.org for more details. Before we listen to the conversation, here is an edited Michael Tsarian giving an introduction to the first ARC convention.
Well, everyone, welcome to Bath and to the conference, the convention. I'm Michael Tsarian, for those who have never heard or seen me before. It's actually only the second time that I've been speaking in Britain. Second presentation, second time in public here. So it's a great personal pleasure for me, and I really want to thank Karen also for inviting me to the event, which is in a wonderful setting, by the way. This is a tremendous history here, as you well know. I hope you get the time to take Daniel's tour around the town and familiarize yourself with the place if you haven't already. And Karen has chosen a great lineup of speakers for this event. Some of my personal favorites as well. And of course, these are some of the people that she's featured in her wonderful book, which is available downstairs. I'll try to read some quotes from the book a little bit later if I have the chance. And also, it's a special, it was especially important that she dedicated the book to Patrick McGoohan, the creator of the Prisoner series. It had a great influence on my personal life, but I was walking downtown in Bath the other day and actually saw a corporate logo. Let me see if I can find it. And it absolutely would have made him cringe. I mean, it's a funny old world anyway, and you have to laugh just to keep sane. But this particular logo, let's take a look at this for a minute. Right? I am who I am because of everyone. Now, see, on paper that sounds marvelous, right? Very frou-frou, very trendy, very modern, very collectivist. And as I say, the guy would be turning in his grave because That's what's happening in today's world. We're dealing with a very much, in fact, you could say that the whole dynamic comes down to the difference between the collective and the individual. And I assume that the people I'm addressing here in the audience today are aware of this, and that you're interested in these particular subjects, and the wider version of alternative research subjects, defines you, or at least it does in my eyes, that, you are aware of that and seeking for that level of individualism, separation, because we are now living in a situation where the bricks for the global village are being created. And this may only, millions of people walk past these types of mottos, corporate advertisements every day. And that makes them feel fuzzy and warm subliminally. The subtextual messages behind, terms like this make the vast majority of people feel good. And we have philosophers, we have entire philosophies from people like Friedrich Hegel who absolutely concluded. And then people like Sigmund Freud and others, basically confirming it in different language later on, that that's in fact what is going on, that there is no such thing as an individual at all. There may not even be anything as individual consciousness. There's only a social persona or social ego. And that's quite frightening. And it gives rise then to thoughts about, well, my goodness, maybe the McGoons of the world, weren't entirely wrong. And that they were, on the contrary, on the ball. But another thing about shows like that, and from a British context, others as well, like Doctor Who and Blake 7, maybe from an American context, X-Files and V, and many, many others I could mention, films, documentaries. You'd wonder then, wouldn't you, that since, 1960s or even the advent of television, why it is that with all these fantastic messages and scenarios and insights and mystical and metaphysical shows and programs, people don't change. It just doesn't get through. And yet you think in that medium, that would be the key medium. It's not necessarily didactic, it's not necessarily declarative, right? It's working with the right brain. How then with this, because not all television is negative. So you want to ask, wouldn't you, why is it that people remain the way they are? In a pretty much unconscious state. Is it because people really want freedom from freedom? Is it because they're scared to death of what it means to walk the Siddhartha road? Is it because they don't really want truth, justice, and freedom? Now that's a very hard question and controversial one to ask, but everyone here should be asking it, because what happens if the answer happens to be yes? What happens if that is in fact true? Well, then that makes the people here a very select group. And the point I'd like to make is then you better be applauding yourselves, because even to get this far is an enormous success, enormous advancement. It also means that you've probably realized that you are your own teacher and that you are your own pupil, which is a very big step as well. To break through that dynamic, to realize that you are your own priest or your own priestess. There's no teacher, there's nobody teaching you anything, and the fact that you've even got this far implies that you're kind of aware of that. You've brought yourself here, so applaud yourself. And, feel good about that particular fact. It's very necessary in a situation in the world in which we are, where there are unconscious people walking around, and I'm sorry to have to say that, but when you walk around, that's what I see in people's faces and eyes, is an absence, an avoidance, and an escapism, chronically. But from what? Knowledge? No, it's something deeper than that. And reminds me also to say that even the teachers that Karen has assembled here and that turn up at other conferences and so on, these individuals, when we listen to them, are we aware that it's not just intellectual stimulation? It's not just food for the brain? It's something much more. But we have to fundamentally understand there's something deeper than just the knowledge. Now we have the internet, we have television and all sorts of other electronic means of gathering incredible knowledge. But even though that is the case, one must never lose sight, at least in my work, because I never stop talking about consciousness and the war on consciousness, is that basically everything that you hear today and during the weekend here is absolutely ultimately about yourself. Because whether you realize it or not, and maybe this is what should be your homework for the weekend, if you don't mind me saying that, and that is to contemplate deeply on the fact that everything that you hear of this kind of subject matter is testament to the fact that you are now on holy ground. Probably the only holy ground that exists, because that doesn't lie with the religions of the world. That's part of that matrix of control, to make sure that you just don't have an understanding of selfhood. This knowledge that immediately, if you call it occult, if you permit me to use that word, and all I mean is esoteric, it is occult because it is actually sacred. And it's sacred because it has to do with your selfhood. In the early stages, you don't know that. It's intriguing. It's read this, read that, and pick up the sound bites and go from there. In the early stages, of course, one will not understand that. But the more mature person as they develop and they start asking these questions, and as they also start realizing how much they have to sacrifice in daily life to permit themselves to study this because of all of the backlashing and all of the resistance from family members and society. As you start to mature in the subject, you'll suddenly start to question, why do I even bothering with this? And it's at that point that maybe that voice will speak to you and say, but this is about your self-discovery. It's not just food for the mind, food for the brain. This is of paramount importance. Because in my work specifically, everything, the prime datum is consciousness. And if that doesn't change, then you may run around, forever like the Keystone Cops trying to make political and social change, and it will never happen. Because in this game, we don't need to be worrying about CCTV cameras and surveillance from, Big Brother. We need to be worrying about a higher form of surveillance. The surveillance of one's own higher self. That's what we really need to be aware of. Not in some negative way, of course. But very conscious that this is a very living and real and vital thing that has to do with your real purpose on this planet, your dharma. And one should never lose sight of that. Why do you think it is, for instance, that the Freemasonic orders, and I include Knights Templars and Rosicrucians and all of these kinds of people, why do you think they have their hierarchies? Because they know exactly what I'm talking about. First, they have a certain tacit respect for history. That's one thing you must give them. They are preservers of ancient gnosis and knowledge. But the other one is that they understand that you just can't take the mugger up the street. And just allow them access, you see, to sacred knowledge. And in one way that's understandable. Of course, they take it too far. And they lose sight of the fact that all this knowledge is actually in the keeping of all humanity. It's not for an elect or specific group in that obvious way. But there's a price that comes with being a seeker after truth. From the emails that I get, from the communiques that I get, of course you get a lot of different kinds of things. But I often notice that there's a great passion in the people, especially from the younger, and they wish that they could just completely dive into this material. Not even have to work and not have any of those worries. So that they could really jump in and absorb it, and have nothing else going on in their lives except that. To be able to travel around, to be able to study endlessly. And that is incredible. But of course, the reality is that you can't. We have to have one foot in the world and one foot in that other holy place. And that is, again, a major struggle, as you well know. And I think the last thing I'll say before we move on, I won't take up too much of your time here, is that probably because of religion and just the entire matrix of confusion and lies and trickery that we've got in the world today, we probably do, in fact, have a very misgiven understanding of what is the self and what is the soul. So my parting words to you would be, maybe we need to completely burn down, deconstruct all the ideas that we have about the soul. And my last point really will be that what happens, we've been talking about knowledge being sort of the road to selfhood. What happens if the self and the soul is, as the psychologist Thomas Szasz said, not something you find and not something that you've been given, but something that you create here in this world, now, in this life, through your experience? Now that gives a lot of pause, because what happens if that is the case? That you're not already born with what we call soul. Maybe that's lies, more deception. But that you have to create it